Okay, so these are notes 14.6. The Allies win World War II. So we're going to talk a little bit about D-Day. We're also going to talk about the end of the war. There's a lot of information in this section, and um, a lot of time we could spend, but we're going to try to get through it as quickly as possible. So one of the problems or the arguments that the Russians had made was that uh, the Allies needed to attack on the Western Front. They really felt like that they had been fighting on the Eastern Front for so long, and the Allies have been fighting in North Africa and up through Italy, but really France and Germany and any of those smaller countries that had been taken over didn't really have, besides bombing, didn't have any, um, you know, any invasions or anything like that. So in November of 1943, we had been in the war almost 2 years by this point, actively in the war about 9 months. I'm sorry, not 9 months, but about a year and a half. Um, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at what's called the Conference. Telleran Conference. In this conference, it's also the a lot of the photos from that time period. We'll call it like the Big Three meeting or something like that. Um, it's where these are going to meet and they're going to decide to do what's called Operation Overlord. Probably the one that really did not want to invade sooner was Churchill, and just because he had a lot of memories of World War One and the bloodbath that um, the British had went through, and they were afraid to repeat that. Operation Overlord was the invasion of Normandy Beach, which was on the coast of France right here. It's probably one of the most talked about battles in World War II, I would say. Um, One of the things that we see in this is they know in the beginning that it's going to be a really tough road, and they also know that a lot of people are going to die. And that was one of the hardest reasons for deciding to do it. But there seemed to be no other way to really get a good blow at Germany. The commander of Operation Overlord was Eisenhower. He was the supreme commander of all the Allied forces. They put him over all the Allied forces. Um, like I said, there's so much we could talk about with this one. There's about 3 or 4 different video clips I could show you. Um, and for time's sake, we probably won't be able to do that. But basically, it was 47 Allied divisions, 4,400 ships, 5 beaches. There's a lot more that went on than just the beach landings. The beach landing was probably the most brutal um, piece of it. One of the things that we did is we decided to try to deceive the Germans. So what we did is we basically put um, some fake headquarters in Dover, which was actually across. Um, I'll try to show you here on the map this deception of Calais. Right here, you can see here's Dover. So we've set up fake headquarters, and then we basically put all kinds of things. We made wood ships, we made things out of cardboard, anything to make it look like there was a lot of things um, coming across the strait or ready to come across the strait there in Dover. And radio messages, that was another thing we did. The One of the things with that is once the British or the Germans got this intelligence, they took a major tank division and basically, put it around here at Calais, and that piece, the deception of Calais, had a big impact on the success of Normandy. Now, the success of Normandy did not come with the easily with without the loss of life, especially on our part. We had quite, it was, D-Day was a very brutal day overall. So we have the five beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword Beach. One of the best, I know Saving Private Ryan has some good parts of it too, but one of the best films on just the invasion is called The Longest Day. It's black and white, but it's still a really good film. It was June 1944. We called it D-Day. 11,000 planes bombed the area first, and I had a map at some point. But the idea here was that they were going to weaken these defenses. Um, the Germans were dug in. They had the high ground. If you look at a lot of the things with uh, D-Day, there was a lot of pieces of that. There was, um, you know, everything from the metal crosses on the beach to the way the bunkers were set. They had had almost 2 years, really, to because they had taken over France in 1941 to really dig in there. In order to get the tanks and the major equipment up off the beach, it took some coordinated effort. So um, they also had there was a really big piece of the engineers that had to try to get through off the beach, and that once we got on the beach and took over some of those guns, then to be able to um, do the basically the logistical feat of trying to get the major equipment to where we needed it to be. At the time when we invaded Normandy, Germany began fighting a two-front war. It wasn't that, because we talked about Stalingrad before, it ended his hopes of any major successes, but they were still fighting on the Eastern Front. That doesn't stop the fighting of the Eastern Front just because he lost. In Stalingrad, it pushed him back. He starts to fight defensive, not offensive, but they're still fighting. Here's a good example of Dwight Eisenhower there on the left, and British General Bernard Montgomery. And they worked closely together, although Eisenhower was the main one. He'll eventually become a president after the war. August of 1944, we liberated Paris. Um, in the Battle of the Bulge, and here's an example of the liberation of Paris, that was pretty exciting for a lot of people in France, just because um, they had not been able to, they basically been under Nazi rule for about 2 years, so that made a really big impact on that. One of the things about that was as the Allies began moving in across Europe, the people within um, Germany began to get nervous that maybe they need to be on a different side here at the end of the war. We have some attempts on Hitler's life, and actually, some of them uh, are going to almost succeed. In fact, Rommel, the Desert Fox, was probably involved in one of those explosion attempts and poisoned himself and died. So Hitler's really feeling losing some of the support of his military officials, and he really, even though he was a ruthless ruler, he knew that he was losing and he needed a win. So one of the things he did was he counterattacked in what's called the Battle of the Bulge. Um, as the Allies were moving across, you can see here's the U.S. Third Army, here's the First Army, and this is Belgium here, Luxembourg down here to this uh, Germany line. They actually found a bulge in the lines and pushed through, and they captured several of these key towns. Not only that, they split these two divisions apart, which made a big impact overall on the American successes. Um, and basically, um, the Allies were holding on for dear life by cutting them in half. That had a really big uh, piece of it. The other thing that happened is this was actually in December of 1944. 4 it would have been. And basically, they couldn't get through. They could not get the air support that they needed, so they couldn't push the Germans back like they normally had. Um, so one of the things that happened is just like this, they just held their lines, and that was the goal. You hold whatever area is yours. You're gonna have to hold that area. Like a couple days before Christmas, the skies cleared, they got air support, and they were able to push the Germans back. That offensive piece was the last time that Hitler was able to go in the offensive realm. It was he put a lot of resources into that to try and push the Americans back because he felt like if he could push them, split them in two, he could weaken them and possibly push them back towards the coast. January of 1945, about a month later, we have the Soviets reaching Berlin. If you look here, you can see how the war is progressing. Here's the Battle of Stalingrad as the Soviets are moving in from this way, heading to Berlin primarily. And you can see that we come up here from Tunisia and Sicily coming up here into Italy. But then we kind of stall because of the mountains and things. One will go around this way, but then we realize we're going to have to just invade France. So invading France, one of the issues with the Americans was, well, the Allies on the British and the American compared to the Soviets, is we were afraid of who was going to get to Berlin first. Because even though Russia was our ally, we were afraid that possibly there would be an issue with whoever got to Berlin first would take control of that area. So we don't get to Berlin first, and that probably had an effect on the Cold War later on. April 1945, we reach the Rhine River. We're getting close on this side of Germany. April 30th of 1945, Hitler commits suicide in his bunker, and May 7th, Germany surrenders. Now, once we have Germany basically in the bag, or we know it's done, we start to, even before this, the beginning of 1945, we really start putting a lot more equipment towards Japan because we know basically Europe's pretty much done. So we started this idea of island hopping, capturing Japanese held islands. Every island was strategically placed to what would get closer to Japan. One of our most important pieces was these Navajo code talkers. We would put our code into Navajo, and then we had code talkers on different places that would be able to read it, and we didn't even know it, just in their Navajo language. And it was never, that code was never able to be cracked by the Japanese. And one of the reasons for that is because they didn't really have a written language. So that's it's really hard to crack that code if you don't even really have a written language of your own. The idea of the kamikaze, the pilots that deliberately crash their planes into ships. There's a few ships that had a really big impact on, depending on where the plane would hit. We had 3,000 pilots that did that, but overall it didn't have any big impact on our ships. And then once we realized that these weren't just, they weren't just dive bombing, they were actually coming to destroy themselves in our ship, we would try to shoot them out of the air before they would hit us. On the island of Iwo Jima, U.S. Marines fought for 36 days. We have 23,000 Marines dying. This is a really, really big piece of our fight, for sure. At Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa is a really important thing. There was the army there, but the Marines were an important piece of that too, and that was a hard fought time. On the island of Iwo Jima is where we get this photo of basically the 4 Marines trying to place the United States flag at the top of one of the hills that they reached, and that has ended up being a memorial overall and a symbol of American military, for sure. We did begin to bomb Tokyo every night. That was a part of our plan.